Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Night Drive Week 2 Preview Podcast. I'm Josh Welge. I'm here with Steve Soucie. Joe Aguilar from the Northwest Herald will be along a little bit later to talk about football teams up in McHenry County. Steve, how you doing today?
Not too bad. Getting ready for Week 2.
Yeah, if it matches Week 1, where I covered 2 games that came down in the last 10 seconds, we're in pretty good shape. It was a really good start to the season. But yeah, really looking forward to this weekend's action. But before we get started, we're going to talk about some of the top Week 2 games. But it's never too early to start talking playoffs, right? I mean, and Soucie, your playoff projections coming out of Week 1 dropped on FridayNightDrive.com today on Wednesday. And it's funny, I was looking at some of the projections and I saw some very familiar faces and some very unfamiliar places. I mean, the likes of like a Richmond Burton in 3A. I think I might have seen Lamont in 5A. I saw some Chicago Public League teams in some spots that I don't normally see them. And I know there's a couple reasons for that. One related to the multiplier and the multiplier waiver. I think the other related to some enrollment adjustments. Can you educate our viewers a little bit?
Yeah, I think I think a large portion of why you're seeing what you saw there is there were just so many more teams that ended up having multiplied enrollments this year. There were a little over 20 last year. They changed the process in the off season, and not only do you have to qualify for potential getting a waiver, you actually have to ask for it. And I think, and then it goes through an evaluation period. And I think a combination of two things led to what we're having here. One, I thought the evaluation thing was going to be kind of a rubber stamp type of situation. It turned out it wasn't. It was actually pretty hard to get approval from the IHSA. And then there were a lot of schools that frankly just didn't apply for them. There were 64 teams that have a multiplied enrollment this year, plus another 4 that are affected by the success formula. So when you talk about 40 or 50 teams, and maybe not all of them are playoff qualifiers, but you're talking about at least 30 or 35 teams that are having an enrollment that they had in the past get multiplied. So what you're seeing is a lot of those teams, some of them not exactly playoff stalwarts, but if they get in, they're going to go from being a 4A team to maybe a 6A team. And then conversely, these schools that are not multiplied, the list of schools that you just mentioned, someone has to slide down to make room for those schools that are getting multiplied and moved up. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing schools like Lamont. I think the one that really got me was I was looking at 4 and 5A. The school that threw me in 5A, Glenwood, is currently projected as the largest 5A school. I can't remember when they were ever not a 6A school. And then you look at 5A at the back end of 4A, Morris, Metamora, Sacred Heart Griffin, Montini, Boylan, Cahokia. These are all teams that you kind of think in your mind, most likely 5A, and all of those schools, especially the first ones I mentioned there, are looking almost locked into 4A at this point. So you're just going to have to get used to a lot of schools that you're like, oh, they're a 7A team. They've always been a 7A team. Maybe not so fast. I mean, that's just what we're going to really have to factor out here. It's going to be really interesting to see, particularly what I'm watching right now is where these Chicago Public League schools land, because some of these schools, you're used to them being in the smaller classifications, 3, 4A. 4A usually has 8, 9 public league schools. This week I only had 4 projected in there. And it doesn't seem like a lot. Oh, you're only talking about 5 teams. Well, that means that there are 5 different teams other than CPL, and those CPL teams go somewhere else. So maybe being a class that's only had 2 or 3 CPL teams, now they've got 6, 7. Changes the whole landscape of all the fields.
And as a reference point, I think you said 64 teams being multiplied. Typically in recent years, we've seen it closer to 20.
Yeah, low 20s is usually what it is. And that's the thing that we're looking at right now is, all those schools are obviously not going to make the playoffs that are multiplied. But if 20 more make it that were multiplied that aren't before, that's going to have a dramatic effect on what classes teams end up in.
And then also the enrollment adjustments. I know you and I were talking about that at our game we were at last Thursday. I mean, I think there's about 100 schools that there was it.
Oh, there were more than that. There were more than that, and some of them, some of them were, some of them it was only maybe 5, 6 students. But in those smaller classifications, when you're on the bubble, that can make a huge difference. The one that really stood out to me is Wilmington. It looked like they were kind of a firm 3A. Their enrollment dropped 20, 22 kids, and then that moved them into being a firm 2A. So that's what the difference of some of those students go. And almost every school had some sort of adjustment, whether it be 1, 2, 3, in some cases 50, 100. There was some sort of issue with the IHSA getting the numbers from the Illinois School Board or whatever it's called, the ISB, I believe it's called, and it caused a delay, and those numbers were in flux until 3 days before the season. I didn't know for sure what the actual enrollment numbers were.
And I know we're speaking of that in terms of playoff projections, but also it could have an effect or will have an effect on the, we vote in the Associated Press statewide polls 1A through 8A. If I'm not mistaken, it's going to look a little bit different this week than last with teams moving around in different classes, right?
There will be some adjustments made, but like some of the setup for that was done before these numbers changed. So I'm not sure if the AP is going to go back and reclassify everybody. That would probably be the right thing to do, but they may not do it. It's just a poll. It's nothing. It's for nothing official. So,
right.
And those classes change anyway. Like sometimes you're voting on a team all year long, and they move up a class, they move down a class. So, like they say, for entertainment purposes only. That's what the polls are in that situation. So,
do you anticipate more than? I mean, you've already seen some of the shifts. In the week one, do you anticipate seeing more than usual, week to week or before the end of the season, or is it kind of baked in at this point?
I wouldn't say it's baked in. I think, as always, the biggest variable is the Chicago Public League. They're the hardest team to get information on. Usually the data on them is only what you're able to elicit from the regular season. And I mean, I'm evaluating teams right now that have not played a game yet. So obviously that's going to change. And there are some of those divisions where right now, I mean, there was one Chicago Public League division where I think every single team lost. I mean, so someone is going to have to emerge from that. They're playing stronger non-conference competition than they are in the regular season. So sorting that all out takes a few weeks at the very least, and sometimes it takes all season. And you're saying, well, what difference does it make? They're public league teams. They're probably not going to be a playoff factor. Well, if I'm looking at two different schools and one has a 400 enrollment and one has an 1,800 enrollment, that does make a big difference. Because if the 1,800 team wins out, then that's a 7A school, and then that pushes the line. If it's a 400, it pushes it the other way. So, I mean, figuring out those schools is probably the hardest process that comes into it. And I don't think I'm even remotely comfortable with those two teams until like week 4 or week 5, getting a feel for who's probably going to get in and who isn't. So right now, it's little more than a somewhat educated guess when I'm guessing on some of these public league divisions.
I mean, there's some programs I bet that you could probably look at their record, their win-loss year by year and make a prediction. There's other programs that you got to blindfold a little bit, at the beginning of the year.
Well, sometimes they just fluctuate wildly. I mean, there have been teams in the past that have gone 0-9 one year and turned it around and gone 9-0 the next. And there's really no explanation for how this happened. So it's definitely the wild card variable in this. As far as your traditional schools and your traditional conferences, yes, there will be some upstart schools, some schools right now that maybe I've over-evaluated based on past tradition or under-evaluated. Maybe there's something there. I mean, I think one of the biggest questions that I got about the projection this week that has started to come in is you forgot to put Geneva in there. I didn't forget to put Geneva in there. I have them projected with a 4-5 record right now. That might be wrong, but right now, and like I said, I might be over-evaluating a couple of teams on their schedule, and those situations will ferret themselves out. I redo it every single week. I don't go off of what I had the past week. After this one's over, I throw it out and I start working on the next one. So I reevaluate every remaining game on the schedule every single week. So right now, my evaluation is that Geneva will finish 4-5. Next week, after what comes in this week, that could change to 7-2 in a blink of an eye. I mean, that's how this works early in the season. There's a lot of variance to it.
I'll tell you what, we need to do a hard knocks with Souce's playoff projections to follow him around to see what the week schedule is like going through this. But you mentioned 4-5 with one school with Geneva. I did see in your playoff projections today, I think right now we only have 4-5 teams projected to get in the playoffs, but you're expecting that number to probably go up at some point.
Oh yeah, I definitely do, because like what I try to explain to people right now, the first week projection especially is simply me trying to stack the conferences in order of the way that I think that they're going to finish. And the first projection is obviously going to produce a lot of situations where there's a 9-0, an 8-1, a 7-2, a 6-3, a 5-4, and it's going to go in a straight line. That's the way the first projection works. We all know that's not going to happen. And when it starts to happen, you'll have some of those teams maybe that had at 5-4 slip down, take a loss, lose, get to a situation where they might be 4-5. You have a team that I have projected to go 4-5. Maybe they win, get themselves in. Maybe they lose and drop to the 3 and 6 tier. It's just like right in the middle of those conferences. Sometimes like the projection is saying, okay, 4th, 5th, and 6th, they're going to go 2-0 against the other two teams in that group, 1-1, 0-2. Well, what happens if they all go 1-1? Are they all going to finish 5-4? Is there going to be no 6-3 team? Or are they all going to finish 4-5? And then that creates a whole different problem. Like there's nobody coming from those situations when we originally thought there would be at least one. So it all becomes like, especially some of these coin flip games when we get later in the season, you know, if a team runs a clean sheet, well then that's fine. But more often than not, it does not happen. And then there are the straight upsets that throw another wrinkle into it. So right now, this is the cleanest path. After the week 1 projection, it starts to get messier with upsets, unexpected wins by teams, things like that. Then you have to reevaluate each game. So right now is the cleanest one, and it's usually the one that produces the fewest number of 4-win teams. As we go along, I think that number grows.
No, I mean, it gets messy just in week 9 when you're looking at, what's going to happen. Now you're talking about 8 more weeks of data. I mean, there's a lot to be resolved, definitely. But but everybody, please check out Souce's playoff projections on FridayNightDrive.com. We're going to take a quick break, hear from a word from our sponsors, and then we'll have Joe Aguiar from Northwest Aero join us.
SGKR Injury Attorneys tackles the toughest cases. I'm Matt Rundio. When life throws a flag, we go on offense to protect your rights. Don't get sidelined. Score a touchdown with SGKR. Visit us at sgkr.law.
I'm State Representative Steve Reich. Since 2017, I've led the fight to reform our child welfare system and supported educational choice for every kid in Illinois. I've worked to stop the collapse of our public pensions while standing up for businesses that are being crushed by crippling mandates. And I've never forgotten who pays the bill. The work isn't finished, and as I run for re-election, I'm asking for your support. I'm Steve Reich, and I approve this message.
At Oliver's, we are proud to serve our community. We serve up great customer service, quality products, ease of shopping, and we serve up delicious barbecued sandwiches at our fundraiser cookouts. So stop by Oliver's, 748 North Brinton and Dixon, and help fund our local clubs and events.
Back here on the Friday Night Drive podcast, Josh Welge with Steve Soucie. I'm joined now by Joe Aguiar from the Northwest Herald. Joe, how you doing, man?
Good, guys. How you doing?
Doing well, thank you. So, Joe, I tell you what, man, talk about not waiting for one of the games of the year, week 1 in McHenry County. You were at Cary Grove, Prairie Ridge, two of the powers in the Fox Fight Conference the last several years. And Luke Vanderweel, wow, pretty good performance, kind of an early player of the year type performance from that young man.
Yeah, exactly. He's player of the year material. We knew he would be going into this season. Had a great junior year, but missed about 6-7 games because he had a broken bone in his leg. He did come back late in the season for their playoff game against Wheaton St. Francis round 2. And they lost that football game. But then he played the entire basketball season, track. He's a real tenacious, strong kid. He's not the biggest kid. He's 5'9", maybe 175, but he is shifty and strong, and he's got enough speed that when he needs to turn it on, he can do it. He just makes people miss. We tend to see guys like that every now and then who just make kids look like they're in fifth grade, varsity football players. And he did a lot of that against Cary Grove. He was the difference in the ball game. Almost had 200 rushing yards at halftime. Finished with 236, something like that. Didn't carry the ball a ton. 4 touchdowns. They were all long, highlight reel type runs. And, that's what he can do. And against a good opponent, too. Cary Grove ran the table last year in the Fox Valley, which doesn't play non-conference games. It's a 10-man conference, so they play, all conference games. And Cary Grove 9-0 last year. Prairie Ridge went 9-0 last year. A lot of new guys from 2 years ago. But Vanderbilt was on that team. He played fullback, good football player, and he showed it certainly on opening night.
You mentioned Luke Vanderweel missed, some games last year. Of course, Cary Grove, Logan Abrams, they're really standout fullback and linebacker missed time last year as well. And I know he played Friday, but reading your story, it's my understanding that he just played defense. What's your impressions about, what they're going to do with Logan moving forward?
Yeah, that's really the biggest question, I think, for this area going forward in the Fox Valley Conference. Abrams suffered a Linz-Frank injury, which is in the foot. Last year, he missed the rest of the season. Got about midway through the season, then that happened, and then he was done for the year. He had surgery. And the more I read up about it, I don't know if you guys have covered athletes who've had that injury. I personally, I've been doing this a long time. I don't know if I've covered a kid who had that injury. It's a tough one. And he had surgery, came back in track, and he throws the shot and discus, medaled in both events at state. But you're not, throwing the discus. Not that I've ever thrown the discus or the shot in my life, but that doesn't require a lot of pounding running, obviously. But he did great in track. It looked like he was primed. Maybe he still is for a big season. But to not see him play fullback was a little disturbing and, quite frankly, just more so just disappointing, because you want the best for the kid. He's a real good kid, great family, the whole 9 yards. And he's an explosive player. As a sophomore 2 years ago, rushed for 1,500 yards. They won state in 6A, had 26 touchdowns. I mean, it was kind of silly numbers he put up. So without him on the field, Cary Grove graduated its 2 biggest playmakers from last year, the quarterback, Peyton Seberg, who's the son of head coach Brad Seberg, and then Holden Boone, who had a really nice year as well. Those guys could break off a 75-yard run at any time. And they really don't have that this year. They have a sophomore quarterback, pretty big, good-sized kid, Jackson Barrett, who's like 6'2", looks the part, can throw it a little bit. But without Abrams on offense, I don't know. He played the whole game on defense at linebacker. I can't say he, rang up 10 tackles, was in the backfield all night. He played, and I think he was good. I didn't watch the tape, but they need him on offense, because I just don't know if they've got that explosiveness that they had a year ago. I know it's only one game. We don't want to overreact to anything, but I hope he's okay. I hope the foot is okay, because when healthy, and if he can play on both sides of the football at full strength, talk about player of the year material in Vanderbilt, that's Logan Abrams, who I think is an all-state caliber player if he's healthy.
And they got a tough week 2 game. I mean, they played Burlington Central. I believe they posted a shutout week 1. I know they've had some success in recent years. They had the quarterback, Jackson Alcorn, a lot of success. But I know I read that their coach, Brian Iasi, he really likes his defense quite a bit.
Yeah, he loved it last year, and he loves it again this year. They had a kid, Aiden Nuno, who's going to W. Eau Claire. He's not Brian Yossi, the head coach, told me, if the kid were like 2 inches taller, he'd be being recruited by a lot of, Power 5 schools. I don't think he's exaggerating there. Nuno had 3 sacks the other day. They were playing, was it Crystal Lake? One of the Crystal Lake schools, I think, offhand. But he's a big, strong kid. He's always been strong. We did a story on him and his Miami of Ohio offensive lineman, Zach Bound offensive lineman, Zach Calder in the beginning of the season. And Zach was saying kid's been strong since he met him as a freshman. So Nuno's a real tough kid. Holkring, again, going to Miami, Ohio, plays left tackle. The quarterback, Landon Arnold, did okay for his first start. He actually started a couple of games as a sophomore when Jackson Alcorn, who graduated this year, was out with an injury. But they're going to be strong again. They made the playoffs last year, Burlington Central, for the first time in 10 years. they're determined that to show that that was not a fluke, that they're going to be strong again this year. I think they will be. And here we go, week 2. It's going to be a good one. Cary Grove, again, are they going to be as good as last year when they went to the semis and lost to Geneva? I doubt it, but they're still a good football team. They're well coached, really great coaching staff, not only Seabird, but a veteran staff there. They'll be good, but this is a really, I don't want to call it a must game for Cary Grove because there's still going to be a lot of teams in this conference in the Fox Valley, but certainly a big one Friday night.
Joe, before we get out of here, where are you going on Friday night? What's your thoughts on week 2?
Yeah, I'm going to Prairie Ridge, see if they can follow up, that strong performance against Cary Grove in their home opener now. They have Jacobs, which they believe they can win the conference. They have a veteran team on both sides of the football. They got twins at quarterback and wide receiver. They got a real good running back, a guy we probably don't hear enough about, and we've been writing about him for the last couple of years, is Caden DeMel, who's over 2,000 career rushing yards going into the season, had 150 last week. They beat a Hampshire team that's kind of rebuilding still. So take that for what you will. But, still 150 yards, right? It's 150 yards. So he's a real good running back. They got some playmakers. They had a freshman lead the team in tackles last year. Jack Coates, he's a player. He's a guy to look, watch his name in the next 2-3 years because he's going to be a D1 kid, it looks like. So Jacobs is good. This is a great opportunity. You hate to say statement game this early in the season, but it is. You can go to Prairie Ridge and beat Vanderweel and Prairie Ridge. Wow. I mean, Jacobs would be sitting pretty there at 2-0. But there's, in the Fox Valley, the 10 teams, there's probably like 5 that are the top level playoff caliber teams. And the other 5 are trying to figure out, going through some rebuilding, trying to get, to 4 or 5 wins. But Jacobs certainly in that top half of the FEC. And so this is a big game. Jacobs traveling to Crystal Lake to play Prairie Ridge. That's where I'll be Friday night.
Cool. That's Joe Aguilar. You can read his stuff in the Northwest Herald and Friday Night Drive. You can also see him on our Bears Insider podcast with Michael Welge. That Dick Butkus jersey in the background reminded me of it, so I did not forget about that. So check Joe out on our Bears Insider podcast with Michael as well. Joe, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks, guys.
Well, Steve, as we look ahead to week 2, I noted you had written a story kind of looking at some of the big games this week. And the one thing you noted too is it never starts too early, the drive for 5 wins. And one thing you noted too is there's teams out there that they want to get to 2-0 because they see what's ahead of them. And then there's the other teams that, man, we better avoid 0-2 because we see what's ahead of us.
Yeah, there are quite a few teams that are in that circumstance, and it seems very strange to call week 2 games pivotal, but I can think of 10 or 15 or even 20 instances this week where, the result of that game is going to have a pretty big effect on both sides of the field, whether it be a win or a loss. Ideally you want to be 2-0 out of this pocket, especially some of these schools that are playing in these powerhouse conferences. And obviously if you're in the Chicago Catholic League, you don't have a lot of margin for error. Doesn't look like you're going to have much in the Duquesne this year. We've talked about the West Suburban Silver. I mean, these are conferences where every single week you're going to have a team that if you are not sharp and you are not on your game, you can pick up a loss, and you only have so many opportunities to pick up those losses and still be sure you're going to get into the playoff field. So I do think we're going to have some 4-win teams in the playoffs, but you don't want to put that to fate because, like I said, last year that trend kind of reversed on us. We only had one 4-win team make the field at the end of the day, and there were probably 10, 15 of them out there that were holding their breath, hoping for that extra chance. So the best way to make sure that doesn't happen is get yourself to that 5-win total, and the best way to ensure that you get there is to get out of these first 2 in most people's cases, non-conference games unscathed.
Well, you mentioned Chicago Catholic League, and I mean, there's a few marquee games this week in that league. Obviously, Brother Rice and Marist battle for Mount Pulaski. But St. Rita, Mount Carmel, both of those teams coming off of week 1 wins, close week 1 wins. St. Rita gets that really good win over Marist, but boy, it's like they go right back in, and then they put Mount Carmel. And one thing that I saw in your story today that's going to be out tomorrow is that St. Rita, all 9 of their games are against CCL teams. I mean, my goodness. I know not every team is Mount Carmel, but geez, I mean, you're facing a really tough opponent every week.
Yeah, they've run into a situation in St. Rita where to protect some rivalries, they needed to do it that way, because they're no longer in a division with both, with teams that they would ordinarily play in the past. So to protect those rivalries, that's what they have to do. But it certainly makes for, I don't think anybody's relishing the opportunity to have 9 Chicago Catholic League teams on their schedule. But that's what St. Rita has. And to be honest with you, I think they're a really good football team. But they're a really good football team that, to be fair and honest, might end up with a 6-3, 5-4 record just because of the sheer volume of quality football teams on that schedule.
Yeah, no doubt. And people want to check out Friday night. Our Russ Hodges will be at that game, St. Rita, Mount Carmel. You mentioned, though, that teams that wanting to avoid going 0-2 with what they see ahead of them. A team that's not familiar with struggling to get into the playoffs, Joliet Catholic is one of them. They lose that week 1 game to Lions, and now they go to Glenbard West on Saturday, which I think looked like it was going to be a tough game regardless. But then after what Glenbard West went in and did to Batavia last week, beating Batavia, man, tough game for Joliet Catholic right off the bat. Great matchup for sure.
And Joliet Catholic's another school that people obviously don't line up to play them. That nobody's volunteering for that assignment. Like we talked before, the Lions game last week was something that materialized fairly late in the spring. It was just both of us need a game. We got to do something here, guys. So let's play this. And Glenbard West is now a game that looks a lot more daunting after what Glenbard West was able to do to Batavia. And Joliet Catholic's got to go on the road for that one. Dushan Field is a tough place for opponents to play. It's a great environment for high school football, but road teams have a hard time there. They just usually do. So it's going to be very interesting to look at that. But like you said, you just look down the line on their schedule. It's a relative gauntlet. We got Marist in week 4, Nazareth week 5, Mount Carmel week 7, close the season with Providence. I mean, I just ran off just 4 of their games. I mean, that are right there that are going to be difficult for them. All 4 of those games will be difficult for them in the conference schedule. If they go to 0-2, they have to win 2 of those games. Have to get to 5 wins. So, that becomes a real perilous situation for them moving forward. So 0-2, Joliet Catholic at 0-2 potentially, if that were to happen to them, it's not a great situation. It is one of those situations where you immediately put them on the monitor for, watching them week to week to see if they can get it back to 500 and then climb from there, because an 0-2 hole for Joliet Catholic is a little bit deeper hole than it is for some other teams that might find themselves in that same situation.
Yeah, on the other hand, Glenbard West, they're 1-0, but they can't feel too good about themselves considering what they have down the road in the West Suburban Silver. I mean, that league went 6-1 week 1, and the only loss last week was by York that went to the state championship game last year. So, Glenbard West has a really tough schedule ahead, but that's obviously a really big win for them last week. I'm going to put you on the spot. Glenbard West, Joliet Catholic, have they played each other? Do you know?
I believe they may have met in a playoff game at some point in time, but I am not positive about that. I don't think there's much history there if there is one.
I'll tell you a matchup where there is a little bit of recent history. A matchup in Western Illinois. Dixon and Byron playing. Dixon and Byron played a heck of a game last year. They came down to the very end. Byron went for 2 at the end to beat Dixon in the last seconds. I think it's going to be another great one again. A lot of the same characters from that matchup is back. Of course, Caden Considine for Byron. Of course, Landon Knigge for Dixon. What do you make of that matchup? That should be a really good one in Big Northern. Game of the year, really.
Well, this for both of those 2 schools is kind of become obviously the game of the year by default. Those 2 programs have kind of separated themselves from the rest of the Big Northern. They are a locked conference. They don't play any non-conference games. So if you're going to get a test during the regular season, it pretty much has to come here, because I don't think any of the other schools in that conference right now are quite anywhere near the level that they need to be at to give them a really good game. So it's definitely going to be like a challenge type of situation for both of these 2 teams to bring their best efforts, because I don't think they have a lot of real taxing games the rest of the regular season. So, If you're going to have that game where you got to get it locked up and play for 4 quarters, the only thing about this, and we've talked about this a little bit before, we were talking a little bit about with Matt on Friday, what are we doing here, conferences? Why are we putting all of our premier matchups on the front half of the schedule? I mean, this is a week 2 game that feels like it should be in week 7 or week 8. Let's get us a little build-up going. Let's get a little energy for these big conference matchups, guys.
This is really a question more for an athletic director, but how do they determine? Is it a random general? I mean, how do they determine? I know they kind of like move a schedule around on a year-to-year basis, but I am curious about that because, I mean, geez, like you said, Dixon and Byron week 2. I mean, can't we get a little chill in the air before they face each other?
Yeah, exactly. And I think all conferences do it different. Some of them maybe kind of look to history to kind of set it up for them. Other ones do the same. But I've noticed that a lot this year, and even in some of them that maybe aren't these marquee, huge rivalries that everyone's talking about. Some of these like really, close community rivalry games, they seem to be coming earlier and earlier in the schedule, and they're conference games. And I'm like, why are we doing this so early? Why don't we take a little nod to some history here and get a little build-up going for these games? But it is what it is. I mean, we got to play them regardless, especially in the lot conferences. But it does seem strange to have this game on the schedule in week 2. And instead of, say, let's go week 7, week 8, something like that after, a full body of work has been developed.
Yeah, a couple non-conference games I want to hit on before we get out of here. And one of them, or both of them, being non-conference. One of them, Geneva and Oswego, they used to be in the conference together, many, many years ago. I know they faced each other about 10 or 15 years ago for a few games. But, wow, really interesting game. Oswego comes off of a really nice one over Naperville Central. Geneva, I think we're going to find out a little bit more about Geneva than we did week 1 when they go to Oswego, and then they got St. Charles North on week 3.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting game in terms of a lot of things right now. One, finding out a little bit more about Geneva, replacing a lot from last year's team that got to the state championship game. I'm still trying to figure out kind of where they fit in that Duquesne conference race that I think is as deep, and I talk about this every year, I feel like it is ridiculously deep this year. I think, and in some cases, I don't even really know how good some teams in that second tier might be, and they might be able to get a little bit froggy. And I was impressed with what Wheaton Warrenville South did in the first week. I was impressed with what Wheaton North did. So how deep is that league, and how much flexibility does Geneva have, if they lose this game to Oswego once they get into conference play? Because I just listed, I didn't even mention Batavia and St. Charles North in that situation. But if both the Wheaton teams are up a notch, and Batavia and St. Charles North are still those strong, dominant programs, there's 4 teams right there that are probably going to be gunning for Geneva. So Geneva may not have a lot of flexibility in terms of if they aren't able to get this win over Oswego. And on Oswego's side of things, I mean, I don't know how good Naperville Central is, but I know that I was very impressed by that score, that victory and that win. I went into that thinking that Oswego had lost a lot and they might have a hard time competing with Naperville Central. They proved me dead incorrect on that one. So I'm interested to see if they can keep going on that tact.
I was there, and I was extremely impressed. I mean, their defense seems to be week or year in and year out good. Running game, year in and year out good. But Drew Kleinhans, junior quarterback, I mean, he's one of the best quarterbacks I've seen play at Oswego, and they're not usually known for their quarterbacks, but he's really good. So, but we're going to find out more about them in Geneva this week. One more match before we get out of here. Richmond, Burton, Coal City, 2 classic 3A, 4A type programs. You noted in your preview this week, I think the last time they faced was in the 2019 semifinals. What do you make of that matchup?
It was just an interesting one that popped up on the schedule. I mean, you're used to those teams maybe running into each other in the playoffs. You're not used to seeing that as a regular season game. It's an interesting situation for Coal City. Go up there with not quite the level of experience that maybe Coal City teams have had in the past, but sticking to that boilerplate, trusting on that offensive line, moving the football, trying to be a physical, aggressive team. Richmond Burton likes to run the ball until the wheels fall off. So I'm interested to see what goes on with those 2 teams, kind of a rock hitting the hard place situation. Who gets out of that? tip of the cap to those guys for scheduling that as a non-conference game. That's a really intriguing one. Two programs that could have easily maybe tried to go find somebody else that might have been more of a guaranteed victory. They didn't do that. They're testing each other, and that's always nice to see when you get two, middle classification, perennial powers. To be completely honest with you, locking horns here in week 2, and there are just a lot of those games around the state this week where it's just two pretty good football teams going at each other, and we still really haven't gotten a full accounting for what these teams are. So I think there's a potential for a lot of fascinating results statewide this week.
Absolutely. A lot of good stuff coming up on Friday night. A lot of good stuff on Friday Night Drive. You want to come back on if you like podcasts, definitely want to check out on Thursday. Eddie Criffio, JT Petaldy will be back with their South and West podcast. And for my money, it's as entertaining as it gets among our Friday Night Drive podcasts. And then Steve and Matt Rodewald will be back on Friday night for the live stream. Of course, we'll be covering wall-to-wall football on Friday. As we get out of here, this is Josh Welge, Soucie. Everybody have a great week too.